Cleopatra VII came to power in a kingdom that was rich in tradition but dangerously weak in reality. Egypt was still wealthy in grain, gold, and prestige, yet its political independence had been eroding for decades. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded after the death of Alexander the Great, had become dependent on Rome for survival. By the time Cleopatra ascended the throne in 51, before Common Era, Egypt was no longer a dominant Mediterranean power. It was a client state in all but name, tied to Rome by debt, treaties, and constant interference. Cleopatra inherited this fragile situation at a young age, likely around 18 years old. According to Ptolemaic custom, she was required to rule jointly with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, who was still a child. Power, however, did not truly rest with the throne. It rested with court officials, generals, and advisors who competed for influence, often manipulating the young king against his sister. Almost immediately, Cleopatra found herself in conflict with her own court, a struggle that exposed how unstable Egypt had become from within. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra did not rely solely on tradition or royal distance. Ancient sources such as Plutarch describe her as politically alert, personally engaged, and unusually capable in diplomacy. She spoke multiple languages and did not need interpreters when dealing with foreign envoys, a rare skill among the Ptolemies, who often spoke only Greek. This was not a matter of vanity, it was a tool. Cleopatra understood that Egypt could no longer survive through isolation or inherited authority. Survival now depended on influence and negotiation. Internal conflict soon turned into open crisis. Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria by forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII and his advisors. She fled east, gathering what support she could near the borders of Egypt. At this moment, Egypt was effectively split between rival rulers, both claiming legitimacy, both seeking recognition from Rome. This civil war did not unfold in isolation. It coincided with a far greater struggle that would decide the fate of the Roman Republic itself. In 48 before Common Era, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria while pursuing his rival Pompey. Pompey had already been murdered on Egyptian soil by order of Ptolemy XIII's court, a decision meant to please Caesar but which instead shocked and angered him. Rome's civil war had now spilled directly into Egypt, turning the kingdom into a battlefield of imperial politics. Cleopatra quickly grasped what this meant. Egypt's future would be decided not only by Egyptian forces, but by Roman judgment. Cleopatra sought an audience with Caesar, an action that ancient writers portray dramatically. While some details of her approach, such as being smuggled into the palace wrapped in fabric, come from later sources and may be embellished, the central fact is clear. Cleopatra deliberately placed herself before the most powerful Roman alive. This was not a romantic gesture. It was a political calculation aimed at restoring her throne and securing Roman support. Any emotional motivations attributed to this act are assumptions and cannot be proven with certainty. Caesar sided with Cleopatra, partly because Rome had a financial interest in Egypt's debts and partly because stability served Roman interests. The conflict escalated into what modern historians call the Alexandrian War. After months of fighting, Ptolemy XIII was defeated and later drowned while fleeing. Cleopatra was restored to power, now ruling alongside another younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as required by tradition. From this point forward, Egypt's independence existed only through Roman tolerance. Cleopatra retained her throne, but she did so by aligning Egypt's fate with Rome's internal struggles. This was the central reality of her reign. Every decision she made was shaped by the knowledge that Egypt could not resist Rome militarily. It could only survive by choosing the right allies at the right time. Cleopatra's leadership style was already clear. She was pragmatic rather than sentimental, bold rather than passive, and willing to take enormous personal risks for political survival. Her early alliance with Caesar was not an exception but a pattern. Egypt's future would be negotiated in the corridors of Roman power, not decided on Egyptian battlefields. This dependence, accepted as necessity, quietly set Egypt on a path where one failed calculation could mean total collapse. Julius Caesar's assassination in 44. before Common Era shattered the fragile balance that had protected Cleopatra's throne. With Caesar gone, Egypt lost its most powerful patron, and Rome descended into another cycle of civil war. Cleopatra acted quickly. Her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIV, died soon after Caesar's death. Ancient sources suggest poisoning, but this cannot be proven and remains an assumption. What is certain is that Cleopatra elevated her son, Ptolemy XV, known as Caesarion, as her co-ruler, openly presenting him as Caesar's child. This was a calculated signal to Rome that Egypt still had a direct link to the legacy of Caesar. Rome, however, was now ruled not by one man, but by three. The second triumvirate formed between Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, dividing Roman authority and territory. Antony took control of the eastern provinces, including regions directly bordering Egypt. This placed Cleopatra in immediate danger and opportunity. Her survival depended on winning the favor of the man who now commanded Rome's armies in the east. In 41 before Common Era, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him at Tarsus in modern Anatolia. Ancient authors describe her arrival as theatrical, rich with symbolism and luxury. While these accounts likely exaggerate the spectacle, the political purpose is undeniable. Cleopatra arrived not as a submissive client, but as a sovereign ruler, offering resources, money, and strategic support. Egypt's wealth, especially its grain supply, was critical to Roman stability. Cleopatra understood this leverage and used it deliberately. Antony needed Egypt as much as Cleopatra needed him. He required funds for military campaigns against Rome's enemies and against Parthia, the great eastern power that had humiliated Rome only years earlier. Cleopatra needed security, recognition of her rule, and the restoration of Egyptian territory lost under Roman pressure. Their alliance was rooted in mutual advantage. Any suggestion that romance alone drove these early decisions is an assumption not supported by reliable evidence. Cleopatra spent the winter of 41 to 40 before Common Era with Antony in Alexandria. During this time, Antony confirmed her position as queen and ordered the execution of her rival sister, Arsinoe, who had been held in Roman captivity. This act removed a direct threat to Cleopatra's rule, but it also bound her more tightly to Roman violence and Roman judgment. Power was preserved, but at a moral and political cost. Children were born from this union in 40, before Common Era, twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. Their existence further intertwined Egyptian and Roman futures. Antony returned to Rome, where political necessity forced him into marriage with Octavia, the sister of Octavian. This marriage was meant to secure unity within the triumvirate. For Cleopatra, it was a warning. Alliances in Rome shifted rapidly, and personal bonds meant little when set against Roman ambition. Over the following years, Antony's dependence on Cleopatra deepened. His Parthian campaign failed, damaging his prestige. Egypt became his primary source of money and manpower. In return, Antony granted Cleopatra control over vast territories in the eastern Mediterranean, including parts of Syria, Phoenicia, and Cyprus. These grants were formalized in the event later known as the Donations of Alexandria in 34, before Common Era. Cleopatra was presented as Queen of Kings, and her children were assigned future realms. This moment marked a turning point. What began as a pragmatic alliance now appeared, especially to Roman eyes, as a dangerous reordering of power. Octavian seized the opportunity. Through speeches, letters, and controlled messaging, he portrayed Antony as a man corrupted by an Eastern queen, willing to abandon Roman values and submit to foreign rule. This narrative ignored the political logic behind Antony's choices, but it was effective. Cleopatra and Antony, for their part, seemed increasingly convinced that the Roman East could sustain an alternative center of power. Alexandria was presented as a rival to Rome, rich, ancient, and culturally prestigious. Whether Cleopatra truly believed this vision could succeed is uncertain and remains an assumption. What is clear is that this belief shaped their actions. They underestimated Rome's unity under Octavian and overestimated the loyalty of Roman elites to Antony. By binding Egypt's fate to a divided Roman general, Cleopatra made a gamble similar to the one that had once saved her throne. This time, however, the stakes were higher and the margin for error was gone. Octavian now had his weapon, a story of betrayal that would justify war not just against Antony, but against Egypt itself. By 32, before Common Era, open conflict between Octavian and Mark Antony was no longer avoidable. Octavian had consolidated his control over Rome in the western provinces, presenting himself as the defender of Roman tradition. Antony remained in the east with Cleopatra, commanding significant forces but increasingly isolated politically. The final break came when Octavian made public what he claimed was Antony's will, allegedly discovered and read aloud in Rome. According to ancient sources, the document recognized Caesarion as Julius Caesar's legitimate son and promised eastern territories to Cleopatra's children. Whether the will was presented accurately or manipulated for effect is uncertain and must be treated as an assumption. What mattered was the result. Roman public opinion turned decisively against Antony. Octavian carefully framed the coming conflict not as another Roman civil war, but as a war against a foreign queen. The Senate declared war on Cleopatra, not on Antony. This distinction was crucial. It allowed Octavian to claim moral authority, while portraying Antony as a man who had abandoned Rome for Egypt. Cleopatra, now fully identified as Rome's enemy, had no path left except resistance. Cleopatra and Antony gathered their forces in Greece, assembling a large fleet and army. On paper, their strength appeared formidable. They possessed more ships and significant manpower drawn from eastern client kingdoms. Cleopatra personally contributed Egypt's fleet and treasury. Yet strategic weaknesses were already visible. Their forces were spread across vast distances, supply lines were strained, and loyalty among allied rulers was uncertain. Octavian's general Agrippa, an experienced and disciplined commander, began systematically cutting off Antony's access to ports and resources. The decisive confrontation came on the 2nd of September in 31, before Common Era near Actium, on the western coast of Greece. Cleopatra and Antony chose to rely heavily on naval power, a decision that remains debated by historians. Some suggest Cleopatra favored a sea battle to protect Egypt's fleet and treasury. Others argue that Antony's troops were weakened by disease and desertion, leaving few alternatives. These interpretations involve assumptions, as ancient sources do not fully agree. What is clear is that Octavian's fleet was better trained, more mobile, and commanded with precision. As the battle unfolded, confusion and poor coordination plagued Antony's side. Cleopatra's squadron, positioned with the treasury ships, broke through the fighting and sailed south toward Egypt. Antony followed her, abandoning the bulk of his fleet. Ancient writers offer conflicting explanations. Some describe this as a planned withdrawal that failed. Others portray it as a moment of panic or miscommunication. The exact motivation cannot be proven and remains uncertain. What can be stated with confidence is that this retreat shattered morale. Left without leadership, the remaining fleet surrendered or was destroyed. Actium was not merely a tactical defeat, it was a psychological collapse. Octavian's victory reinforced his image as Rome's savior and confirmed Antony's portrayal as weak and unreliable. One by one, Antony's allies defected. Client kings switched allegiance. Legions deserted. The cause and effect were relentless. Military loss led to political abandonment, which in turn made further resistance impossible. Cleopatra and Antony retreated to Egypt, hoping to regroup. Cleopatra explored diplomatic options, including negotiations with Octavian, possibly offering to surrender Antony or renounce power in favor of her children. The details of these attempts are fragmentary and uncertain. What is known is that Octavian rejected any settlement that allowed Cleopatra to remain a ruling monarch. Egypt itself had become the prize. In 30, before Common Era, Octavian marched into Egypt. Antony attempted a final defense, but his remaining forces either surrendered or fled. Believing Cleopatra dead after receiving false information, Antony took his own life. When Cleopatra learned the truth, she had him brought to her before he died. These events are described by ancient authors, though specific details may be shaped by literary tradition. With Antony gone, Cleopatra stood alone. Her last strategic gamble had failed. She had underestimated Octavian's patience, discipline, and ability to shape perception as a weapon. she had overestimated the possibility that Rome would accept an Eastern rival power. Actium revealed the truth. Egypt could not survive as an independent kingdom in a Roman world that demanded absolute control. From this moment, Egypt's fate was sealed, not by a single battle, but by a chain of decisions that left no room for recovery. Cleopatra understood that defeat did not end with the loss of armies. It ended with captivity, humiliation, and the erasure of authority. After Antony's death, Octavian entered Alexandria as the undisputed victor. He treated Cleopatra with calculated restraint. She was kept alive, guarded, and spoken to with formal respect. This was not mercy. Octavian intended to take her to Rome and display her in a triumph, a public symbol of foreign defeat. Cleopatra recognized this plan immediately. She attempted one last negotiation. Ancient sources report that Cleopatra sought assurances that her children would rule Egypt, or at least retain royal status. Octavian offered no such guarantees. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, represented a direct threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's heir. Cleopatra sent Caesarion south toward Nubia, possibly with the intention of escape. Shortly after, he was captured and killed on Octavian's orders. This act was politically logical, but ruthless. It eliminated any living rival connected to Caesar's bloodline. Cleopatra now faced a narrowing set of choices. She had lost her army, her allies, and her heirs. What remained was her image and the memory of her rule. Ancient writers describe her final days as deliberate and composed. While some details are uncertain, including the exact method of her death, the core decision is not in doubt. Cleopatra chose death over submission. The most famous account describes her death by the bite of an asp, a symbol associated with royalty and divine authority in Egypt. Other ancient sources suggest poison or a concealed toxin. The true method cannot be verified with certainty and remains an assumption. What matters historically is not how she died, but why. Cleopatra's death was a final act of political control. By denying Octavian his triumph, she preserved her dignity and transformed herself from a captive queen into a legend. Cleopatra died in 30, before Common Era, at approximately 39 years of age. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended after nearly 3 centuries of rule. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, governed directly by officials loyal to Octavian. Unlike other provinces, Egypt was treated as the personal domain of the Roman ruler, its grain supply tightly controlled to secure Rome's population and prevent rebellion. Octavian returned to Rome as the unchallenged master of the Roman world. In 27, before Common Era, he was granted the title Augustus, marking the formal beginning of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra's fall was not a side story to this transformation. It was central to it. The conquest of Egypt gave Augustus immense wealth, strategic security, and symbolic authority. Rome no longer competed with rival kingdoms, it absorbed them. Cleopatra's legacy has often been distorted by later propaganda and popular imagination. Roman writers, influenced by Augustan ideology, portrayed her as seductive, dangerous, and irrational. These portrayals served political purposes and cannot be taken at face value. When examined through verified historical evidence, Cleopatra emerges as a capable and highly intelligent ruler operating under extreme constraints. She did not fail because she lacked ability. She failed because the world she ruled was being reshaped by forces larger than any single kingdom. Her story reflects a broader historical pattern. Smaller powers often survive by aligning with dominant empires, trading autonomy for protection. This strategy can succeed temporarily, as it did early in Cleopatra's reign, but it carries inherent risk. When the balance of power shifts, yesterday's protector becomes tomorrow's conqueror. Cleopatra understood this danger, yet she had no alternative. Egypt could not resist Rome by force, and neutrality was impossible. Cleopatra's brilliance lay in her adaptability and her willingness to act decisively. Her miscalculation lay in believing that Rome's internal divisions could be turned into lasting opportunity. She underestimated how quickly Rome would unify once a single victor emerged. In that moment, Egypt ceased to be a partner and became a prize. Cleopatra's final alliance was not a love story or a moral failure. It was a political gamble made in a collapsing world order. Her life shows how intelligence and ambition can coexist with fatal error, and how the choices of one leader, made under pressure, can alter the course of history. With her death, an ancient kingdom vanished, and a new empire began, carrying the consequences of that moment across centuries.